Okie dokie, let's talk about some more tech that we've seen in Mythic Plus this week. And in addition to talking about some tech and strategies that we have discovered, we're also going to talk about some of the bugs that we've been seeing. So no, you're not necessarily going crazy. First and foremost, let's talk about the second boss of Mists and Scythe. The second boss of Mists and Scythe is incredibly weird right now, where whenever you have this dodgeball ability, for the longest time on retail, the dodgeball would actually contact the clones and the Vulpins. Most people thought this was an intended mechanic. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but as of lately, the dodgeball has inconsistently been either not or it has been hitting these clones. Now, I haven't seen it hitting the Vulpins at all, but at about half of my runs, it will actually hit the clones still, even though it won't hit the Vulpins. And so I suspect that this is just a bug, but I'm not positive. But just know that, no, you're not going crazy, that this is absolutely happening inside of runs. And like you can see right there, our dodgeball didn't contact this clone at all. And so we just have to end up killing this clone with our hands as opposed to allowing it to die to the dodgeball. Next bug that I've been noticing a lot of is, so in two specific points, on the Dawnbreaker and in the Necropolis and Necrotic Wake, the ability Acid Rain does not work. And so what Acid Rain is it deals nature damage every 1 second to up to 5 enemies inside of your healing rain. This is a restoration shaman ability. And so it has to do with the terrain moving. And this is probably about 60% of Restoration Shaman's damage. And so the fact that they are unable to actually do damage in both of these dungeons to mobs is a huge deal for their viability in both of these keys, especially at a high level, to the point where bringing a Restoration Shaman in these dungeons is substantially less good, to the point where you really much prefer like a Discipline Priest or something like that, where we're seeing Resto Shamans being dropped in this key because Acid Rain is not working and it's not allowing them to reasonably do damage. So those are two bugs that, no, you're not going crazy. These are just actual things that are happening. Let's talk about some good tech as opposed to some bad bugs. So good tech, first and foremost, there's a couple of things that can be knocked up in Siege of Borealis that people were not aware of to begin with. First and foremost, some of the spotters can be knocked up. Hold on, let me open up 3chess.io real quick and go to Siege of Borealis. So depending on the spotter, so this spotter can't be CC'd at all. This Ashvane spotter in G25, this is the first one that you encounter in the entire dungeon. This mob cannot be touched. This spotter here in G29 and this spotter that's attached to the Archer pack in G37 can be affected by Tail Swipe and Thunderstorm. And this is actually pretty useful for specific situations. So these spotters love to flee. Probably the most annoying mechanic in Mythic Plus is mobs that flee whenever they get low HP. And so as you can see right here, this spotter is running away at 20% health, and our comm is Thunderstorm the mob up. And whenever it gets Thunderstormed up, then it will stop running away. And then it'll start casting Sighted Artillery again. But this is just a situation where this is a positive interaction with the spotter that allows you to not have it just run straight into the boss. Thunderstorm, Upheaval does not work on it. Thunderstorm and Tail Swipe are effects that I do know that work on it. In addition to the spotter, the boss can also be knocked up with effects like Thunderstorm and Tail Swipe. And what you can see right here is we go Thunderstorm, and then we go Thunderstorm, and then we go Tail Swipe on the Fiery Ricochet cast. And so we let the first Fiery Ricochet cast go through. And then on the second Fiery Ricochet cast, which involves a bunch of movement for your healer, we delay it a couple of times to allow our healer to be able to plant and actually heal us through the Fiery Ricochet damage. In addition to that, what this also does is it delays the Fiery Ricochet cast 18 seconds after it it goes off, not whenever it's supposed to go off, which this almost guarantees the fact that we're not going to get a third Fiery Ricochet cast per phase. Now, this is something that's like pretty scary for high-end keys, but occasionally we'll also skip the second Fiery Ricochet cast. The other tech, let's talk about Grim Batol. So Grim Batol is, I would say, a pretty undiscovered dungeon in terms of tech. It's a dungeon that players don't really play a lot because the dungeon is really fucking hard. First and foremost, what you want to know is this Molten Giant here sometimes gets stunned and gets a 20% damage amp on it. A lot of people don't know how it works. Basically, the Beguilers have a cast called Beguile. It's an invisible ability that stuns the giant for 12 seconds, increasing its damage taken by 20%. How it works is this giant will occasionally stomp the ground and knock back the beguilers. Once the giant does that, then the beguilers will cast that beguile ability on the mob, assuming that you don't CC it here, right? So right here, we have it knocked back. You see that it gets dazed, and we immediately pull the pack. Our only responsibility here is to not stun that beguiler that's casting on the giant. Then the giant gets stunned for 12 seconds. After careful consideration, I wonder if I could Oppressing Roar the stun on the giant, but that's something I'm going to have to test later. But it does make the mob increase damage taken by 20% for 12 seconds. On top of that as well, it's not doing its like ground slam and stuff like that. So that's how you should be looking at the mobs in this area. Next big tip is for Thronggus. Some new tech has been discovered with Thronggus lately, where if you are able to LOS his, I believe it's Molten Flurry cast, then he won't cast the Molten Spittle onto players. And this is a huge deal, because the Molten Spittle in conjunction with the AoE is probably by far the hardest part of the Thronggus encounter, just because the AoE damage that is done by him forging his weapons while you have that dot on you is in most circumstances unhealable. Like in our group, we'll drop, we'll press a very large personal, like a 40% DR, on top of like Spirit Link in order to be able to live it. So as you can see right here, he's going to cast that Molten Flurry ability, and then our tank dips out of LOS. Whenever our tank dips out of LOS, he cancels that Molten Flurry ability, not allowing him to put the spittle on us, and then he just casts his Forge Mace, and then he gets big and red, and then he chases our tank per usual. So it only cancels that one ability on the mobs. The next thing that you should be looking forward to, so the Hatchlings here have a very interesting mechanic. So whenever the Hatchlings die, they explode and they put an increased shadow damage taken debuff on you that you can see notated on my frames here. However, if you meld the pack off, if you feign death the pack off, if you invis or wipe to the pack while the Hatchlings are still up, they will not put that increased shadow damage taken debuff on you. And this is pretty good. Once you know that whenever there are the double corruptors here, your meld player can walk up, tag the mobs, and then meld it off, and then they will no longer debuff you. And that is a huge deal. It reduces the amount of damage that you end up taking by a substantial amount from these double corruptors, which honestly are complete bullshit, because whenever you are taking 100% increased shadow damage, having double corruptor casting that ability on you is nearly impossible to live. But yeah, that's basically it. That's all the tips and tech and tricks that I've seen, in addition to some of the bugs that, no, you're not going crazy. Those are just bugs in the game. Additionally, apparently Blizzard posted a blue post saying that they fixed invisible swirlies on the last boss of Tyrann Scythe. So shout out Blizzard for fixing that finally. Thank God. And we will see you guys in the next video. Adios.